There's a truth about Hollywood that few dare to speak. Behind the perfect smiles, glittering golden statues, and legendary status, sometimes lies a silent series of downfalls. Some have fallen into drug-induced hallucinations, faced legal troubles, nearly become homeless, and almost disappeared from public life. But there are also those who seem untouched. Ron Howard is that image. Hollywood's golden boy, always calm, polite, smiling in the face of adversity, possessing a career so perfect that people believed he was immune to chaos. However, what the public never saw was the pressure he buried for years, the thoughts he never spoke, and the memories locked away behind the glitz and glamour. And then, after the sudden death of Rob Reiner, everything changed. When the entire film industry seemed to freeze, Ron Howard spoke out for the first time, not with Hollywood-style rhetoric, but with the raw truth about silent competition, unspoken emotions, and respect never before mentioned in interviews. A version of Ron Howard no one expected, and this revelation made the story a real shock. What do you think caused Ron Howard to change at this point? How many more truths do you believe Hollywood still hides behind its perfect images? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel to not miss any untold stories. And if you find this content thought-provoking, don't forget to like and share so more people can discuss it. Today, I am here to announce that our office will be prosecuting Nick Reiner, who is accused of murdering his parents, actor and director Rob Reiner and photographer and producer Michelle Singer Reiner. That announcement not only closed a tragedy, but also opened a deep crack in Hollywood. Rob Reiner's death shook the industry, and for Ron Howard, it awakened reflections he had silently buried for years. He began to look back at the fragility of the film world, where everything can change in the blink of an eye, where even the most brilliant careers are built on complex, fragile, and stressful relationships. Ron's words were not professional or formal. They were authentic, personal, and deeply emotional. His prolonged silence didn't disappear, it broke, and in what was uttered, one could clearly sense the memories inextricably linked to Rob Reiner. Suddenly, the public realized the connection between them was deeper than anyone had ever known. Not just colleagues, not just friends of the same generation, but a heavy, haunting bond. Ron Howard's story thus came alive more than ever. Born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, he didn't grow up to pursue fame. He was nurtured within it. His parents, actor Rance Howard and actress Jean Spiegel, created a home where creativity reigned, but discipline was never allowed to be lax. Long working hours, high expectations, and constant uncertainty shaped Ron from a very young age. Before he even understood what a camera was, he was in front of it. At just 18 months old, Ron appeared in the film Frontier Woman, inadvertently stepping into a life that never truly ended. In the late 1950s, the family moved to California, and the concept of a normal childhood quickly vanished. Auditions replaced playgrounds, scripts replaced bicycles, and film sets replaced the streets. While other children played and grew up carefree, Ron memorized lines instinctively. The dining table became his workspace, and a tutor was always present beside the camera. It wasn't a bad childhood, but it wasn't free either. Years later, Ron called it a golden cage, safe, but heartbreakingly lonely. Then everything exploded. On October 3, 1960, The Andy Griffith Show premiered, and 6-year-old Ron became America's most beloved child overnight. He was an icon of innocence, a face that families trusted completely. But behind that smile was a boy quietly doing his homework in cramped rooms, while the laughter of the world echoed outside. Fame looks warm on screen, but it's cold when you get too close. His father tried to protect him, pushing him to write better scripts and instilling in him a single rule that has been etched into his life. Never try to be cute, just act, genuinely. That lesson became the foundation of who Ron Howard was, but it never erased the price he paid for a childhood spent in the spotlight. Ron was always a beloved figure, but behind the lights, he rarely got to be himself. At the same time, Rob Reiner was growing up in the same machine called fame, a place where attention could elevate you to the highest peaks, but also shut out all escape routes. Two children, Two different destinies, but one shared feeling. Constantly being watched, constantly having to meet expectations, and always carrying an invisible weight that never leaves. When the cameras stopped rolling, the emotions didn't disappear. They quietly accumulated, year after year, until they became a part of who they were. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron was only 14, but he had lived almost his entire childhood in a prearranged world. Ron's life had no clear boundary between school and the film set. His peers were gradually replaced by crew members and stars who were far more mature. The concern was genuine, but the sense of belonging was fragile. Small moments revealed it all. On the stage of The Music Man, the 8-year-old boy suddenly stopped mid-dance and whispered that he couldn't continue. Shirley Jones gently reassured him, and the entire film crew quietly adjusted to conceal that fragile moment. In front of the camera, Ron was still the confident boy audiences loved. Behind the scenes, he was a child trembling with fear of making mistakes, of disappointing everyone. It was this experience that later made Ron understand Rob Reiner in a way few could. They both grew up prematurely, were both guided by fathers with high expectations, and both realized that every perfect shot was paid for with silent wounds. Those anxieties never disappeared from Ron Howard. He just learned to hide them skillfully. A calm smile became a protective shell. Confidence transformed into a survival skill in a harsh industry. While Rob chose to express himself through wit and loudness, Ron quietly observed, listened, and remembered. In 1974, fate called his name once again. Happy Days appeared, and 19-year-old Ron Howard stepped into the role of Richie Cunningham, the perfect American boy next door. Audiences were captivated by the image, but behind the scenes, Ron began to feel invisible walls closing in. The role brought fame, but also narrowed the space for him to be himself. Times changed, audiences changed, but the price of growing up in the spotlight remained, a price Ron Howard had to carry for the rest of his life. By 1977, at age 23, Ron Howard still looked like a teenager whenever the cameras were rolling. Meanwhile, the world outside was undergoing a dramatic transformation. Culture was in turmoil. Society was in upheaval. Protests dominated the front pages of newspapers, and his contemporaries were beginning to question values once taken for granted. Only Richie Cunningham remained trapped in a bubble of nostalgia, completely detached from reality. This distance eroded Ron until he could no longer remain silent. He sent a memo to ABC, asking for only one thing: a storyline that touched upon the Vietnam War, a true story, something that accurately reflected what people were living and enduring. The answer came quickly and coldly. No, the rejection didn't cause an explosion, but rather a silent crack, gradually spreading into a profound weariness. Ron began to feel himself fading into the background, as if he were borrowing someone else's life to exist, while his own real life hung in limbo, neither moving forward nor backward. Then the truth became undeniably clear. If he wanted to find his voice again, he had to leave the front of the camera. That realization reflected the path Rob Reiner would later be forced to take. Both yearned for truth within a system that preferred to freeze people in familiar images. For Ron, directing was never a romantic dream. It was an escape, the only way for him to breathe. The opportunity presented itself in 1977 when Roger Corman made a daring offer: star in Eat My Dust in exchange for the right to direct his next film. What Ron sought wasn't the spotlight, but control, the feeling of owning the story. That gamble gave birth to Grand Theft Auto, a chaotic car comedy he co-wrote with his father, Rance Howard. With a budget of only $62,000, they destroyed nearly 70 cars and, in an unbelievable way, turned it into a $15 million hit. Hollywood began to take notice of Ron Howard. From then on, his directing career opened up irreversibly. Subsequent projects demanded even greater precision and authenticity, culminating in Apollo 13, where Ron found true creative joy through research, by delving into the truth, and then distilling everything he learned from drama and comedy to tell the audience in a way that was both engaging and richly detailed. For the first time, Ron felt the full power of creativity, something acting had never given him. It was captivating, even addictive. But control always comes with a price. Each project gradually became so personal, almost obsessive. Every detail, every rhythm weighed heavily on his shoulders like an unshakable responsibility. Success followed success. Night Shift, Splash, Cocoon, Willow, Parenthood. Each victory not only elevated Ron Howard's status, but also silently increased the pressure. The studios placed their complete trust in him, and that trust, over time, transformed into silent expectations that followed him every step of the way. By the early 1990s, Ron Howard was no longer the boy who had just stepped out of Mayberry. He had become a true Hollywood force, and like Rob Reiner, he understood that the spotlight wasn't just dazzling, it could be scorching if you stayed under it for too long. Then Apollo 13 appeared in 1995. It wasn't just a movie, it was a mission. Ron pursued realism to an almost obsessive degree. No shortcuts, no artificial drama, no compromises. The crew shot over 600 scenes in a simulated zero-gravity environment, each lasting only 23 seconds, in a grueling and relentless process. The mission control room was recreated from real NASA control panels, purchased for a symbolic $1 each. Every switch, every detail had to be absolutely precise. Ron worked 18 hours a day for months, barely sleeping, refusing to simplify anything, until his body could no longer take it. One morning, exhaustion struck. Production had to stop. The entire crew waited in silence. When Ron returned, his face pale but his eyes still focused, they greeted him with shirts emblazoned with Mission Control, a humorous way of saying, "We've got you." That moment was etched in Ron's mind. Passion had crossed the line. The price of perfection finally became apparent. And in that realization, Ron understood what Rob Reiner had also known. The pursuit of excellence can subtly pull one away from oneself. So when the bad news about Rob Reiner came later, Ron felt not only grief. It was an awakening. Two creative minds forged by the same fire, both learning that dedication, if not tempered, can lead to isolation. Even before Rob Reiner's passing, Ron Howard carried a personal wound, a quiet pain that never truly faded. In 1991, on paper, his life seemed almost perfect. A flourishing career, complete creative freedom, and the birth of his first child. He was married, beginning to think about a complete family. Cheryl, his steadfast partner, even supported him in turning down a huge raise. From the outside, it was a well-deserved reward for years of tireless work. Then a decision changed everything. 6 months of filming in Ireland. Ron convinced himself he could manage. Cheryl stayed home, managing everything alone with the newborn twins and their youngest daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, while Ron was immersed in endless days of script writing, harsh weather, and studio pressure. He kept telling himself it was only temporary, that this sacrifice was necessary. But deep down, Ron knew he was drifting too far. When he finally returned home, the silence spoke louder than any words. The house seemed different. Laughter had faded. The bond had cracked. Then the moment that nearly broke him arrived. His youngest daughter didn't recognize him. Bryce barely reacted. Cheryl, his steadfast support, stood there with an inexplicable weariness. Years later, Ron admitted that moment had shattered something within him. That was the day the harsh truth struck. Success meant nothing if the price was the loss of those you loved most. No award could compensate for lost time. No praise could mend the emotional rift. At that moment, Ron made a silent promise to himself. Never again. His career would never again be allowed to take more than it gave. But habits forged over a lifetime don't disappear with a single promise. By 2005, during the stressful return of Cinderella Man, Ron realized the old cycles were quietly returning. Endless sleepless nights, countless decisions weighing on his shoulders, and the pressure to achieve absolute perfection. He was away for months at a time, and when he returned, his children were not only taller, but also brought with them moments he hadn't been there to witness. Ron understood it all too well. Ambition, the desire to go further, the belief that he had to always do better than the last time to deserve the opportunity. Cheryl, as always, kept the family together. But Ron knew the burden was never shared equally. The second mistake forced him to confront something buried deep in his childhood, the belief that he always had to say yes, always had to prove himself, always had to exceed others' expectations. That very motivation propelled him to the top, but also nurtured a persistent guilt that never left. In 2025, at Ron and Cheryl's 50th wedding anniversary celebration, that facade was finally removed. Standing at John Burroughs High School of Music, where they first met, Ron donated a bench as a tribute to his life partner of half a century. Then he spoke words that silenced the audience. Ron admitted that he would trade any awards, any blockbuster films, any accolades for lost time with his children. No drama, no embellishment, just the raw truth. That's why Rob Reiner's story resonated so deeply with Ron. It wasn't just about the pain of loss, but about recognition. A reminder of the path they had traveled together, stumbling, paying the price, and learning their lessons in the harshest way possible. Two creative minds forged under the same dazzling spotlight, both understanding the true cost behind the Hollywood dream. These reflections brought Ron back to the bond that had kept him grounded long before fame consumed his life. His relationship with his younger brother, Clint Howard. To the public, Clint was a ubiquitous, familiar face. But to Ron, Clint was living proof that someone truly understood the strange, exhausting feeling of growing up under the never-ending lights of a studio. They grew up side by side on adjacent film sets, passing each other in the corridors crisscrossed with cables and heat. Two children earning money before they could spell their names, memorizing lines before they knew who they were. That shared beginning became Ron's silent anchor, a reminder of who he was under pressure, before expectations, before the spotlight demanded everything. In an industry obsessed with perfection, Clint is a reminder that Ron has never truly been alone. They are not just brothers. They are colleagues, people who have survived a childhood together that few can understand. And when an interview ends, Ron pulls the interviewee closer to listen to the music Clint has just recorded. Clint can't hide his emotions, dancing to the tune, humming softly, pausing to make adjustments, chatting with the sound engineer. In that moment, Ron sees something familiar and heartbreaking. The pure creative energy that existed before all pressure, before all accolades, before success became a burden. As Ron rose to the pinnacle of his career, Clint entered a completely different battle, a silent and prolonged one fought in the shadows. It was the pressure of comparison, of being judged, of being a familiar face to the public, but never truly appreciated. Famous, but always on the fringes, known but rarely understood, this weariness accumulated over the years and eroded Clint in a way Ron could never reach with any of his own successes. In the late 1980s, things began to spiral out of control. Ron watched his brother drift further and further away, but was powerless. No roles, no fame, no protection strong enough to bring Clint back. By 1990, Ron was forced to draw a clear line, the most painful moment of his life. Not anger, not reproach, just a single sentence born from pure love. Either seek help, or I will lose you forever. And that sentence changed everything. Clint chose to recover, chose to continue living, and that decision saved him from himself. Years later, the two brothers shared their story publicly, without embellishment or avoidance, as a vivid testament that family love, when strong enough, can still pull a person back from the brink. If you believe that family love has a greater power than any fame, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel to join us on stories like this. But life never stops there. Decades later, a completely different fear emerged in Ron's life, one he couldn't overcome with the discipline, effort, or self-control that had shaped him for so many years. Clint began to face a serious health problem. Ron didn't elaborate, but just by listening to his voice, one understood that this wasn't a minor issue, but a life-changing event. For someone who always believed he could prepare for any scenario, this completely shattered that illusion. Ron couldn't yell cut, couldn't rewrite the script, and couldn't protect his brother the way Clint had quietly shielded him when fame became too heavy. For the first time, Ron admitted a truth that terrified him. He wasn't afraid of criticism, failure, or losing his fame. What he feared most was losing the only person who had been by his side through every chapter of his life, from before fame to when things became complicated. That fear changed him dramatically. Friends noticed Ron slowing down, listening more, being less controlling, and that silent pain shaped how he reacted to Rob Reiner's story. Ron was forced to confront the truth he had avoided for years. There are stories beyond your control, no matter how careful and diligent you are. No award can mend that, and no perfect words can save you from loss. In later interviews, Ron admitted that the pain was deeper than any career setback. It wasn't the industry pressure, not the big projects, but the fear tied to his family. He cited Clint's struggles with drugs and alcohol as the most painful memory to witness, the endless sleepless nights, the childhood memories replaying like an old film reel, the small classroom, the quiet conversations between scenes, the once warm moments now fragile. And guilt always followed. Guilt for his career flourishing while Clint silently fought, guilt for not recognizing the signs sooner, and guilt for not being able to protect his younger brother forever. That realization changed the way Ron lived. He withdrew from long-running projects, turned down many tempting offers, and allowed his company to run without him at the center. No more endless workdays, no more obsession with control. Ron's life now revolves around presence, family, and time. And that's why his reflections on Rob Reiner carry real weight, not as a creator speaking of success, but as one person honoring another. Both are shaped by love, loss, and the price of caring too deeply. Today, Ron Howard's world has slowed down, no longer driven by the relentless pace of filming schedules or endless decisions, but by the gentleness of things once overlooked. Family dinners, quiet moments, silences, no longer frightening, but necessary. What he once sacrificed for his career is now everything. Ron makes one thing clear. He refuses to lose the people he loves again. In a rare moment of absolute honesty, he admits that the quiet periods between projects have profoundly changed him. For decades, he told other people's stories, built other people's worlds, forgetting to listen to his own. At 71, with a vast legacy behind him, Ron finally says what he's avoided for too long. It all means nothing if the people you love start to drift away. Fans weren't surprised to see Ron struggling. What stunned them was that he had endured it all in silence. And then, just as he was beginning to slow down, life dealt another blow. The news about Rob Reiner came like a sudden break, bringing everything to a standstill. Ron was exhausted, worried about his brother Clint's health, and then that headline appeared, cold, unannounced. Rob wasn't just a colleague. He was a mirror image, loud in the quiet Ron, bold in the cautious Ron. But both were driven by the same fire, the same desire to seek truth through creativity. When Ron spoke, his voice choked. He didn't talk about films, nor did he mention awards. He spoke about love, about family, and about how quickly things can change. There's no script for moments like this, he said softly. And for the first time, the man famous for his control was no longer in control. The fear of losing his brother Clint hung over him, combined with the shock of Rob and Michelle's deaths, creating a cumulative sense of loss. It was as if life was cruelly reminding him that control, after all, is just an illusion. That moment wasn't just heartbreaking for Ron. It illuminated everything. Slow down. Live each moment to the fullest. Hold on to your family while you still can. The truths Ron had only recently dared to confront suddenly became urgent, irreversible, and utterly painful. Rob Reiner wasn't just a loss. He was a mirror, a warning, a silent lesson. Loud where Ron was quiet. Reckless where Ron was cautious. But both were on a journey to find meaning in a world full of ostentation and noise. In the weeks that followed, a quiet tension gripped Ron. Not anger, not resentment, but regret. His relationship with Rob was always multifaceted, respect intertwined with rivalry, admiration alongside distance. Two giants walked parallel paths, rarely intersecting, yet always seeing each other's reflection. They weren't enemies. They were role models. Rob's fire challenged Ron's restraint, while Ron's precision softened Rob's intensity. This underlying dynamic haunted Ron. He replayed old moments, conversations never made, words never spoken aloud. Ron once said that perhaps because he grew up in a family of day actors, people without lasting status or fame, he had never placed much faith in reputation, rank, or acclaim. For him, it was all just a way of life, full of ostentation, full of exaggeration, and more fleeting than one might imagine. But it is the unspoken words, the missed moments, that linger the longest. And that is what makes this story so poignant. When Rob Reiner's name was mentioned, Ron Howard didn't respond immediately. He paused, as if considering what to say, or whether to say it at all. Finally, he said softly, Rob was the person who made him think more, work more seriously, and reflect on himself more than anyone else. A relationship that wasn't loud or intimate in the usual way, but deep enough to leave a lasting mark on a lifetime. They didn't walk the same path, nor did they stand opposite each other as rivals. They existed side by side. One was fiery, unafraid of confrontation. The other was quiet, calculating, patient to the point of stubbornness. But it was this very contrast that created an invisible pull. Each success of one forced the other to ask, have I come far enough? No challenge needed, no public comparison required. The other's presence was a constant question. As the years passed, their meetings became less frequent. Compliments were given indirectly. The most important things were put off until next time. And then, that next time never came. When Rob left, Ron lost not just a colleague. He lost a rare mirror, someone who understood what it felt like to grow up in fame, who understood the price of always being right, strong, and successful. Outside, the world continued to spin. New news replaced old. But for Ron, everything slowed down. He began to write, not to publish, not to prove anything, just to put down thoughts he had previously avoided, about silent competition, about conversations that had been delayed for too long, about how sometimes the person who understands you best is the one you never fully confide in. When asked if those writings were related to Rob, Ron just smiled. He said it's a story about losing someone who walked alongside you in silence, not always agreeable, but always making you a better person, a quiet but lasting loss. This story doesn't end with a farewell. It ends with a realization. That legacy isn't about the number of films, awards, or fame. Legacy is about the relationships that shaped us, even those relationships that were never named. So what about you? What do you think truly bound Ron Howard and Rob Reiner together? Rivalry, empathy, or things left unsaid? Leave a comment below. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because some stories only truly begin after the lights go out.